Having to construct one's identity is a decidedly modern issue, like having to pick which Instagram filter best complements your dog's features in a given photo. The psychologist Roy Baumeister has identified two main components of identity. First, continuity, being able to see yourself as the same across time. And second, differentiation, or being able to distinguish yourself from other individuals and groups. People's identity used to depend on things over which they had little control, like their occupation or religious faith. As these traditional sources of meaning and self-definition have receded, the importance of one's personal identity has increased. It's true that people are still part of groups, but now they're tasked with figuring out whether and how to incorporate those into their personal identity, without much or any direction from society. Most people start to form their identities in adolescence. Erik Erikson, a notable psychologist with a name that sounds totally made up, defined identity formation as the critical developmental task of the teen years. Most adolescents haven't yet made the long-term commitments that characterize the transition to adulthood. Things like finding a partner or buying a home or choosing a career, meaning that they have the flexibility to explore different options for their identity. This flexibility, or psychosocial moratorium, can extend well beyond adolescence. Many individuals now postpone these adulty commitments until after college, or after graduate school, or after however you choose to fritter away your precious 20s. Psychologists have spent decades studying identity formation by categorizing people based on two things: how much they've explored their identity and how much they've committed to their identity. Some people explore a lot, and they find an identity to commit to. Some people explore a little bit or not at all, and they still find an identity to commit to. Some people explore a lot, and they still don't make any identity commitments. And some people do neither. Why bother forming a coherent sense of identity? Because there's a bunch of research linking identity commitment to positive outcomes, like more self-esteem, life satisfaction, and purpose in life. Exploring identity sounds like it could be really liberating and cool, right? I get to try new things and define who I am and what I value. I'm a feminist. I'm a researcher. I'm an American. I'm pro-choice. I'm a daughter. I'm white. I'm a millennial. I'm a baker. Although it may sound really liberating and cool, having to reconcile really different parts of oneself into a coherent sense of identity can be very challenging. Sometimes there are even aspects of identity that are incompatible with each other, leading to what Baumeister and his colleagues called an identity conflict. Think about someone who has to balance their identity as a parent with their identity as a professional. These conflicts can be resolved by choosing one aspect of identity over another, or postponing one in favor of the other. For example, deciding to spend a few years focusing on your career, postponing your identity as a parent. Sorting out your identity can be a lifelong endeavor. Things about you and your situation will change, and then you have to figure out how to update your identity accordingly. Personal identities are multifaceted, and you're not equally paying attention to every aspect of your identity all the time. Context can focus attention on certain parts of your identity. If I'm the only woman leaning in during a board meeting full of men, my gender identity is probably going to be pretty obvious. The fact that aspects of your identity interact with context is usually good for you. It helps you behave in ways that are aligned to the demands of the situation and also consistent with who you are. But there are potential downsides to this interaction between identity and context. Any context with relevant stereotypes about a group you identify with can affect you negatively. This is called stereotype threat. If you're part of a group and there are stereotypes about that group, and you're in a context where those stereotypes might be relevant, you might be worried that your actions will confirm those stereotypes for someone else, or that you might be judged in light of those stereotypes, even if you don't believe that the stereotypes are true. Stereotype threat can result in the self-fulfilling prophecy of conforming to those stereotypes. For example, studies have found that if you remind people of their gender before giving a math test, you'll find differences in men and women's scores. But when you don't have that reminder at the start, the difference is reduced or even goes away. So how can we thwart the effects of stereotype threat? Fortunately for you, there's evidence that just knowing about stereotype threat makes it less likely to affect you. Another tool for combating stereotype threat? The multifaceted nature of identity we talked about earlier. Psychologists asked a sample of Asian women to take a math test. Before the test, some were reminded of their Asian identity, some were reminded of their gender identity, and a third group served as a control. Those who were asked to think about their gender identity performed more poorly on the math test than a control. A typical stereotype threat finding. Those who were asked to think about their Asian identity, however, performed much better than the other two groups. So, if you can call to mind parts of your identity that are not stigmatized in that context, often this can help buffer you from the negative effects of stereotype threat. Of course, actually eliminating the stereotype would be much better, but that process might take a little longer. And you can't do it by yourself, and you shouldn't be expected to just because you're a woman. I'm Dr. Rachel Sumner. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Let's do that again. That was fun. The magic is gone.